Hello, my name is Roman Djindjihashvili, and this DVD is going to be dedicated to Scandinavian defense, or sometimes we call it Center Counter. Now, I got multiple requests of doing some typical games played by me. And I did play Scandinavian defense very frequently in the years I played chess, competitive chess. I played it on all kinds of levels against grandmasters, against little lower rated players, and I had tremendous success. The line I'm talking about is e4, d5, and on ed I adopted continuation of knight f6, and with considerable success. Knight f6 is games mostly we're gonna be discussing on this DVD, and I have for you some material with queen takes d5, and after knight c3, queen a5 move. I know today is a big chapter. Queen d6 becomes increasingly popular, but I don't want to discuss this on this DVD because it's a very big chapter and there are several ways to play for white. But right now what I want to discuss is old-fashioned way of playing Scandinavian, which is partially queen takes d5 and mostly knight f6. So let's start looking at some games. I'm gonna mostly look at my own games because they are very typical for this opening and what you can get in this kind of positions. So let's look at the first game played by me against Colombian Grandmaster Alonso Zapata. It was played in 1980. ED knight f6, d4, knight takes d5, knight f3, bishop g4, bishop e2. It's not very competitive way to play against this opening, but it's very reliable. When I lived in the Soviet Union before even I immigrated from there in 1972-73, I played this opening same with bishop e2 move against the rising star then and almost one of the top players in the world at that point, Anatoly Karpov, and I was very successful too. And that game kind of inspired me to play this opening more and more frequently. So after bishop e2, knight c6, castle was played. Now, before we discuss this castle, I gotta tell you that there is very interesting and very competitive play, c4, knight b6, d5. And I have some games for you played with this variation. And this is actually very exciting position happens after that. But not in this game. White chose to castle, e6, c4, knight b6, and bishop e3. Now black gets very, very comfortable position after bishop takes f3, bishop takes f3, knight takes c4, queen a4, knight b6, bishop takes c6, pawn takes c6, queen takes c6, queen d7, rook c1. Well, possibility is queen e4, but black still has very comfortable position by playing c6, followed by bishop e7 or bishop d6 and castling. Bishop on e3 is not very active, which determines, I think, its position slight advantage for black. Rook c1 was played, and now queen takes c6. Rook takes c6, and king d7, and rook to c2. Now let's summarize the results of the opening. Black solved any problem they might have had. They have comfortable potential square on d5. Their king is very well placed on a closed vertical and ready for the endgame. I think, in my opinion, black is better here. Bishop b4 was played. Why didn't want to play knight c3 and to be left with a dark square bishop against knight after bishop takes c3? For example, here now, bishop takes c3 is very strong, and if rook takes, knight on d5 will be permanent, and if pawn takes, then after knight c4, black has maybe decisive advantage, because they are first to get the b file on rook b1, rook b8, and white is in trouble on rook c1, rook b6. Black has very good position. So for this reason, they played a3 first. Now bishop d6, knight c3. Purpose of bishop b4 was to provoke the a3 move. And the reason we provoked the a3 move is because now after rook hb8, rook ac1, a5, white will have difficulties playing b3, and they have kind of backwards b2 pawn. a5, rook d1, c6, rook dc1, rook a6, bishop g5, a4. Now you see the clear weakness on b2. a4, bishop h4, knight d5, knight d1, pawn f5 to prevent exchange of bishops after bishop g3. On bishop g3 will be simply f4, and after f5, f3, rook b3, you see black already has clear advantage. So game continued another 40 moves, and I managed to win, but this is not already, it's clear that black has an advantage, and to see the whole game is does not reflect analysis of the center counter as an opening. This game was played in the New York Open tournament in 1987 against Swedish Grandmaster Ferdinand Ellers. After e4, d5, ed knight f6, d4, knight takes d5, knight f3, bishop g4, bishop e2, knight c6, c4, knight b6, and here he played d5. This is, as I already mentioned in a previous game, is very competitive moves against very sharp positions. That was thoroughly analyzed by me before, of course, the games, before I ever... You cannot allow d5 move without being properly prepared. So after bishop takes f3, my opponent chose bishop takes f3. In a game against Judith Polgar, she played g takes f, and we're going to see another game with g takes f played by Anand against Kamsky, but we're going to get to this a little later. So bishop takes f3, knight e5, bishop e2, and here c6 move. Now c6 move, the idea is to threaten knight takes c4, which was not possible on a previous move because black simply loses a piece. Queen check, taking the knight on c4. So black must prepare it. Now they are kind of simultaneously attacking d5 pawn and c4 pawn. Queen d4 is by far the best option. Knight g6, knight c3, e5. You see, the en passant taking is not possible because queen is hanging, and after e5, queen e4, c takes d, c takes d, bishop d6, and black wants to comfortably finish development, castle, and after f5, they would have very, very good position. Bishop b5 check, knight d7, castle on both sides, and now black is ready to play f5, followed by e4, getting really very strong and dangerous position. Queen f5 is a logical move, attacking the knight and also stopping f5. But that's not going to be for long, because after queen f5, knight c5 was played, and on b4, simply knight a6. Now black is attacking b4 pawn, which has to be protected, and now they're gaining tempo for kicking the queen out, finally, from f5, and after knight e7, queen h3, knight c7 also. Now I'm threatening to take the bishop on b5 and also possibly the pawn on d5, bishop d3, attacking the h7 pawn, f5, and on bishop g5, e4. Black has already an advantage. Bishop c4, h6. We want to clear the position of the g5 bishop. Bishop d2 was played, knight g6. It's clear that black has an advantage because they have potential knight e5 and pushing the pawns, creating very strong threats to white's king. Knight g6 here, white felt that they have quickly to prevent further advancement for black. They played f3, e takes f, and now if rook takes f3 or queen takes f3, black goes knight e5, attacking the bishop on c4, and further on queen h4, having very, very dangerous attack. So g takes f was played, and now white's position completely falls apart. queen f6, creating queen d4 check threat, and after queen f6, it is very, very hard to find any kind of defense for white. Knight e2, simply stopping queen d4, and after knight e2, very strong move b5. Why b5 is so strong? Because after b5, bishop b3 would lose a piece, queen b2 attacking both bishops. So white played bishop c3, attacking the queen, and now very powerful move knight f4 practically ends the game, because if white takes queen, then black is going to take the queen and black is going to end up with extra piece because it's in check, and then rook takes one bishop, and now when white takes the knight, then pawn takes second bishop, and white is simply a piece down, and there is no defense. After knight f4, my opponent played one more move, queen g3, and now after very simple tactical shot, b takes c, simply eliminating bishop, the protector of e2 knight. And now if white takes the queen, after knight takes e2, and then taking the queen on g3, white suffered severe losses of material. And after b takes c, there is no other move, as you can tell. No matter what white plays, they're going to be a piece down. For example, knight takes f4, queen takes e3, simply losing a piece, and queen takes f4. Also, bishop takes f4 wins a piece, because on bishop takes f6 check, simply in between move bishop e3 check, taking the bishop on f6 on the next move, having an extra piece, and easily won position. So I just want to mention that consequences after queen d4, which I had several times, after d5, has to be very carefully analyzed. Well, there are two very strong moves, bishop takes f3 and also gf, and they are like highlights of this sharp variation of Scandinavian. Now, let's move to the next game. Next game was played, there is very interesting story before I show you the next game. Next game was played between Anand and Kamsky in the World Championship candidates match in 1994. And in 1994, I was Gata Kamsky's second, and this was already playoff game, which means the match of 8-game match ended in a draw, and there was supposed to be 2 playoff games. And well, I remember we had a day off, and we spent completely on Scandinavian, and I insisted that Mr. Kamsky played Scandinavian, although he has never played it before. And it's very difficult in a sharp variations there for white to do something productive and get good results without proper preparation. And since this opening was going to be a clear surprise for Anand, so he did not handle it correctly, and quickly got inferior position, and black went on to win the game and the match. Well, e4, d5, you will see the position we just discussed. Knight f6, d4, knight d5, knight f3, bishop g4, bishop e2, knight c6, c4, knight b6, d5, bishop takes f3, and there is a gf move. That's what was played, and this is very sharp move. After knight e5, f4, knight to d7. This is exactly, we prepared that, and this is exactly following my game against Judy Polgar that I'm going to show you right after this. And where I played knight d7, and I got big advantage right in the opening. But the difference that's exactly how my game went with Polgar, and the correct move was e6 here. e6 move gives black very good position. They develop bishop quickly, and that's how you take advantage against broken up white's pawn structure. However, Qxd5 went wrong, and it's very difficult to learn a big opening in one day. Qxd5 went c6. He must have forgotten what we prepared, but he knew the ideas. c6 is the same idea, but it's not nearly as strong as e6 would have been. D takes c, b takes c, bishop e3, e6, queen c2, knight f6, bishop d3, queen c7, white castle, long, bishop e7, and this is actually interesting position. White's goal, since they have two bishops, is to open the position somehow, which they couldn't do because it's not that easy. Well, a move like f5, most likely white will face with e5 move. And knight e4 was played. And after knight e4, knight takes e4, bishop takes e4, and very powerful move, f5, very strong, bishop g2, and now castling. Now you see white will never be able to open position on the king's side and attack black's king. Black's bishop is going to f6, and they're going to have very powerful piece with potentials on attack against white king. Black has already a comfortable position. Rook d3, rook a b8, rook h d1, and c5. And this is the typical position where you see one side has two bishops, but they cannot function fully, because bishop on g2 is not a bad bishop, but it's kind of shooting blanks. There is nothing on this diagonal. Black's bishop, however, will be a lot more powerful on f6, and white has no penetration square on the d file where they have doubled rooks. Position is preferable for for black, in my opinion. So after c5, h3 was played, rook fd8. Now, if all pieces come off the board, you will see the weaknesses like c4, f4, f2, and possibly h3. After, if you exchange all pieces, this h3 pawn may become a target. Rook fd8, b3, knight d7, queen b2, knight f8, knight is going to g6. There is a weakness. Queen e5, rook d to c8, queen takes c7, rook takes c7, king c2, king f7. This position is a big advantage for black. The reason why it's advantage is because if black plays for next 100 moves, knight g6, knight f8, or rook c8 and rook b8, they have a draw. That means white can make no progress at all. They don't have any, without making some progress with your pawns, there's nothing can be done because pieces just don't penetrate anywhere. And pawns, white has no pawns to move. A3 and b4, it's like mission impossible. It is mission impossible because after a5, it will never happen. And the king side pawns are completely frozen. Black is much better here. a4 and a5 was played. And bishop d2, rook a7. Now this is very instructive, and the game went on like almost 80 moves, and we are on the move 28. But this, if we display this game to the end, you can find this game in your database because it was played in a World Championship Candidates match 1994. It's a first playoff games. That will defeat the purpose if we do that, because it's gonna, but if you are really interested in looking how Qxd5 went on winning this game, you can go on and you can find this game. And also although game did continue to 75 moves, the reason why it went that far, because Anand could have resigned it way earlier, but that was sudden that time control, and he tried to take advantage of shortage on time for Qxd5, but Qxd5 overcome the difficulties and won this game. In this position, we're gonna stop. Black has very big advantage. Here's the game, my game against Judith Polgar, played in 1989, e4, d5. This was developed just like Anand's game against Qxd5, d4, knight takes d5, knight f3, bishop g4, bishop e2, knight c6, c4, knight b6, d5, bishop takes f3, gf, knight e5, f4, knight e d7. But Polgar played b3. Same thing would have happened on knight c3. After b3, I played e6. Now de, bishop b4 check, bishop d2, bishop takes d2, queen takes d2, f takes e. In this position, black has clear advantage. White doesn't have safe side to castle, and black wants to go queen f6 and castle either side, and white has terrible pawn structure that is not justified by the position. So what happened after bishop h5 check, g6, bishop f3, queen f6, queen c3 was played, and now simply castling long, queen takes f6, knight takes f6. In my opinion, black is absolutely winning. Well, I did not play this game well from here on, and white managed to draw. After king e2, I made a hyperactive move, e5. I thought after I open position, it's going to be slam dunk, and I won't have to think even. This how easily we'll be winning. However, a better move was rook d4, attacking the f4 pawn, and after king e3, rook h to d8, black has easily won position. Now, we can summarize here the result of the opening. It was total disaster for white. And again, very well played opening by black, by me. Well, most of it was prepared, if not all of it. And what happened in the game, let me show you quickly. e5, it's a mistake. fe, rook h e8, so rook d1. What happened, this move I overlooked. And now, after we take on e5, white got rid of their terrible weakness, the pawn on f4. I didn't take on f5, I went knight d7, and I wanted to take on e5 with a knight, which is what happened. Knight c3, knight takes e5, rook takes d8, rook takes d8, knight e4, and rook f8, knight takes f6, rook takes f6, bishop e4, c6, and what happened from decisive advantage with countless weaknesses for white, decisive advantage for black, they redeemed to symbolic advantage. So I couldn't win this position. I tried hard, and game ended in a draw. Well, this was the result. The result of the opening again was absolutely great for black, just like result of the opening in Anand Kamsky game. Now, next game I want to show you is also very interesting. It was played in U.S. Championship in 1993 against aspiring young talent Tal Shaked. He made the Grandmaster known that year, and he was a very strong player. I think he's currently retired from chess, and he was full scale, started studying in university. And anyway, e4 d5, ed knight f6. Now this is very, very interesting and very typical for positions kind from the opening of Center Counter or Caro-Kann or French, where black has spring counter position, where it's seemed like very tight and less space, but all of a sudden position opens and becomes very sharp. So that's exactly what was in this position. After knight f6, d4, knight takes d5, c4, knight b6, knight f3. Well, I have to tell you that knight f3 is necessary move here because knight c3 is not nearly as good. After knight c3 and e5, black is guaranteed to have at least equal position. Winning a pawn is giving black tremendous compensation after bishop f5 and castling long. This is known already, games been played with very good results for black. And going d5 also result to bishop b4, and black starts quick assault on d5 pawn after c6. Well, anyway, knight f3 was played, which is correct move. Bishop g4, c5, and knight d7. This is theoretical move. It's better than putting knight on d5 because black is going to have big difficulties creating counterplay after knight d5. There were games with knight d5 and nothing good happened for black. So knight d7 is the move. Bishop c4, creating a threat of bishop takes f7. For example, if we go something like c6, bishop takes f7 is nearly winning for white, followed by queen takes g4. So e6 must be played, and after h3, bishop h5, bishop e3, bishop e7, knight c3. Well, here black castled and white castled, and I went b6. That's what I was aiming on, and perhaps the best continuation would have been d5 for white, or maybe even c takes b, a takes b, and d5. But anyway, what they did was g4, bishop g6, and white decided to hang on their space advantage. b4, c6, a3, a5. This was very well played game by black, and I will show you how, with such a passive pieces that black has now, they created some very powerful attack, because white has to worry about a3, b4, c5, d4. This pawn structure, they have to worry about their king. Black's task is a lot easier to develop quickly, so they are preoccupied with development rather than looking at white's weaknesses. They cannot do that. You never start active operations and creating threats and before you are fully developed. And this is my strong belief, and that's what I'm always trying to tell people of all levels. I would never start any activity before I fully develop my pieces. So after a3, a5, queen e2. Now we go b5. You see how black is gaining time on a quick development now. b5, bishop a2. Knight a6. It's interesting that if bishop b3, it's going to be impossible to protect the b4 pawn without playing knight a2, which is pretty bad position for knight. So that's why bishop a2 was played. And after knight a6, queen b2. That's another piece placed in terrible position. Big piece like queen protects little tiny pawn on b4. Knight c7. Now black wants to go knight f6 and knight d5. So white timely stops it by playing knight e5, attacking the c6, black forced to take. And here it's time. Black has developed the knight. Knight potentially will go to d5. And f6 is very strong move. White's king is not secured. Rook a to d1, knight d5. And here white is in grave danger. Taking is real bad, and not taking is not any better because black is trying to play fe and open all their pieces. So white started desperate counterplay on the opposite side of the board. After a4, ab, knight takes d5, ed, ab, and this is very important in between move. So you see, white thinks that they broke up through black's center, because if pawn takes, rook takes d5, otherwise they're gonna take on c6. But after queen a5 attacking the bishop on a2, forcing bishop to move to b1, and queen takes b5, black held the center, and now they already have an extra pawn and practically winning position. Bishop takes g6, hg, ef. Bishop takes f6, and on queen c2, g5, desperation attempt of creating some play for white is h4. Well, it's bad for white, so it's a natural reaction that they try to complicate the position. Gh, and after g5, bishop c3, queen g6, queen e2. You see queen is coming through g4 now. Queen e2, queen e6 check, king h8. White is absolutely lost here. Queen h3 was played, queen h5, and after f4, rook a3. You see now the deadly threat is d4, and to open, you see the queen on the same horizontal as the rook on a3, and after f5 and bishop e5, black simply resigned. There is a d4 threat. There is a possibly queen takes g5 threat. For example, on move like this, we maybe go queen takes g5, and then bishop takes, rook takes h3. White's position is totally hopeless, and my opponent resigned. I think it's very typical position where space disadvantage, a position all of a sudden opens widely, and you find your opponent not prepared for sudden changes, and white's position collapsed here. This is very typical for these types of position. let me give you a little summary of for the games we have already seen. So in E4, D5, ED, Knight F6 variation. Now, of course, there are a bunch of different continuations. We did not cover them all because we cannot have one game on every variation. But in the main system, D4, Knight D5, Knight F3, Bishop G4, Bishop E2, Knight C6. If white castles, this is probably the most expected move, but not as sharp as C4 and not as ambitious as C4. If they castle, what do you have to do? Now, when you go E6, then you develop your bishop on E7, and remember, don't just play this position like a Caro-Kann. So you have to have, that's why your knight is on C6. So you should play this position. This is like the most common setup for white. Well, we didn't look at those games because those games, if we start analyzing those games, they are very slow developing and not much to learn by looking at the game. That's why I want to give you the main pointers. Well, when you castle and white plays something like Knight D2, you have to hope for counterplay in the center. Play something like Bishop F6, not right away because Knight E4 will be possible. Rook E8, Queen D7, on some move H3. Suppose white goes here. Queen D7, then Rook A to D8, and play for counterplay with E5. That's the difference between the space advantage white has in this opening between space advantage in Caro-Kann. In Caro-Kann, you basically sit back and wait what white is going to do for the rest of the game. What I'm saying about Caro-Kann, I mean this type of position. This type of positions, when white develops something. This type of positions with pawns on C6 and E6. It's very difficult for black to play for E5. Well, it's nearly impossible. I hardly have seen any games played with that. Here, the center counter, the whole opening, is designed for a counterplay. Now, let's look at some, I selected some games and the way you should be thinking about them if white plays a little bit unexpected variations. For example, E4, D5, ED, Knight F6, Bishop B5, check. Well, it may be unexpected, but it's been played so many times. Bishop D7 and Bishop C4. Black cannot capture now pawn on D5. So Bishop G4, F3, and the correct move here is Bishop C8, and that's exactly what was played. Why Bishop C8 and not Bishop F5? Well, Bishop F5 is not such a good move because after Knight C3 and Knight D7, white can play G4 and then either G5 with a tempo that black cannot play Knight B6 and later on capture this pawn, or even F4 is rather scary because F5 threat. So that's why bishop has to go to C8, and that's what happened. This game was played. Actually, I rarely bring women's games as example. It was played by played by a lady rated almost 2500. And, well, this game just shows you how women can be dangerous, not only in life, but on a chessboard too. So after bishop c8, knight c3, knight bd7, this is most common play on this variation, knight e2, knight b6, bishop b3. Now, I don't think white should expect to get any advantage in this position. The reason why, although black did play bishop g4, then bishop c8, well, actually bishop d7, g4, and c8, but did they lose really two tempos? Not, of course, because white played bishop from f1 to b5, and then c4, and then b3. And also f3 is played. It kind of it's not a very good position for the f pawn. So black is already doing okay. I have played these positions number of times myself. Well, rather than taking on d5, black played a5. It's also a playable move, but there is absolutely nothing wrong with taking on d5, and that's what I have played in my games. a5, a3, and now a4, bishop a2, knight b takes d5, a5 and a4 hasn't changed much. Knight takes d5, d4, e6, castle, bishop e7. Now, black has absolutely no problems. The light square bishop can be developed via b6 and bishop b7, and dark square bishop of whites doesn't have any active squares to go to. Black is doing just fine. So knight e4 was played. After knight e4, b5 was played. Well, the idea now of knight e4 is to go c4, somehow to gain space. And I like b5 both. It kind of secures the knight's position on d5. Knight f4, bishop b7, queen d3, and black simply castled. After bishop d2 and exchange of knights on f4, bishop d5 was, bishop d5 is one move, and that's what played. Knight d5 was okay as well. Bishop d5 is what black wants to exchange light square bishops and establish control on light squares. So after bishop d5, bishop takes d5, knight takes d5, bishop g3, queen d7, rook a d1, knight b6. Well, black does have unconditional control on light squares on queen side, but white still has a little more space. Position is comfortable for black. That's all I can tell you. I don't know if black has any advantage, but it's very comfortable position. Queen c3. Here, white's play is a little awkward. Queen e1, queen c6, but it's slow developing position, and moves will not change much. Queen e2 and knight b6 was played. The move I like here is queen c4. You know, even if white wins a pawn, black later goes rook b7, has very good pressure on the queen side. Well, of course, queen c4 does not have to be played. Knight b6 was played. Knight c3. And after bishop takes a3, white should never have allowed this shot. What white should have done here is to play c3 to admit completely that they cannot contest black on the light squares on queen side, and try to somehow concentrate on a king side and to create some play. Black does have all these knight squares for queen side, but no concrete plan how to take advantage of them. Knight c3 makes white's case critical. Bishop takes a3. I don't think white overlooked it, but they went for position they shouldn't have gone for. Queen takes c3, queen takes b5, queen takes a3, bishop takes c7, and knight d5. Black has a pass pawn, very strong position, bishop g3, rook f c8. Well, in this position, by playing bishop g3, white allowed knight c3, which doesn't really do much because of simple queen d3. So black did not play queen c3, but knight c3, but black already has very strong pass pawn and centralized knight. Black has very, very big advantage. What happened is rook fc8, rook a1, queen b4, queen d3, queen c4. I want to stop at this point because strategically black is absolutely winning. They went on to win the game, but not the shortest way game continued another 30 moves, which it shouldn't have been. It should have ended much sooner. But play in the opening clearly shows you what happens if white chooses to play in the early stage game bishop b5 and bishop c4. So what do you do here? Go bishop g4, bishop c8, and concentrate on winning your d5 pawn back. That's exactly what happened, and there is no advantage for white. Now, I want to switch your attention to a different center counter. Center counter where after ed, black chooses to play queen takes d5. We're going to come back to knight f6 variation close to the end, but we're going to come back to knight f6 variation the way you shouldn't play it, the way you shouldn't play knight f6 variation. So, but right now, we gonna show you the things that okay to do and you can do. Queen takes d5 is very, very playable variation. And has the reputation of very stable variations. On a queen takes d5, knight c3, now the queen a5 is the main move, and it's been played for many, many decades. But lately, to add to the value of center counter and especially to queen takes d5 variation, there is another move, queen d6, that started getting more and more attention of strong players. But we're not going to cover this now, so let's go with queen a5. And this is the game was played between 2,300 and 2,500 players. It's high enough level for you to pay attention and to see what came out of this opening. Okay, after queen a5, knight f3, knight f6, d4, c6, and knight e5. That's the way I play when I have to play against center counter, queen takes d5 variation, and black played most popular move, bishop e6, bishop f5. We're gonna see a game played with that. Well, actually there is a possibility of going given g4, but bishop e6 is the main move. What's wrong with bishop f5 is white goes g4, and on bishop e4 they will go f3, and if bishop goes back to g6, then h4 creates some problems for black. So what happened in this game is bishop e6. This is the main variation, and it's even been played on the highest possible level in a world championship match between Anand and Kasparov. Well, bishop e6 was played, and after bishop e6, white has choices. I don't think bishop c4 is the best choice for white, and that's what was played. When I play, well, if I play knight c4, and that doesn't mean this is the best move, that's what I like the best, and that's why I think that bishop c4 is not the best choice. Knight c4, probably the best thing to do for black is to take the knight and go e6 and try to play passive but solid position of a Caro-Kann type, because when queen is hanging on queen c7, white may play queen f3, and they are about to get another tempo on black's queen. So black should take here and quickly go on with development. But none of this happened, so let's go to bishop c4 move. Now bishop takes c4, knight takes c4, and black played queen d8. I like this move. I like this move better than queen c7, although queen stands better on c7. I don't know for how long, because bishop f4 is coming still. So queen d8 was played, bishop g5, e6, queen d3, bishop e7, and let me tell you about this pawn structure. This is exactly Caro-Kann type of pawn structure. But this position is better than you could get from Caro-Kann, better for black. The reason? Because white doesn't have a good control in the center. How come? White has knights on c4 and c3. What they need to be doing is to play c4 to get control on critical central squares. But what black can do now, but since white has two knights on c3 and c4, this is rather difficult to do. And black can play knight d7 and quickly c5, getting quick counterplay in the center. That didn't happen in this game, but nevertheless, let's see what did. Okay, after bishop e7, bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6, and knight e4. But this is absolutely harmless attempt for white. What are they trying to do? To go knight d6 check? Well, obviously black is going to castle, and black did, and white castled, and now black goes knight d7. White's space advantage is absolutely worthless in this position. And let me explain you why. This is very important to understand correctly. When you have space advantage, you should try slowly squeeze your opponent. In general, it's the best strategy. Here, we already have two sets of minor pieces exchanged. And black has clear play. White cannot squeeze black. Black has clear plan. Kings castled on the opposite sides. So b5, a5, and start pushing all these pawns on a queen side. Of course, white can do the same, going h4 and g4. But then, where is the space advantage? It's not valid factor in this position. So, position is very leveled, and white has no advantage, in my opinion, at all. f4 was played, queen c7, knight e5. It looks very active for white, but it's perfectly good position for black. Rook a to d8, queen e3, and bishop e7. Here, knight takes d7 was played, rook takes d7, rook d3. Okay, white is preparing rook to swing, maybe at some point, to the king side. But black has all pieces mobilized, and black is doing real well here. And then rook h to d1, b5. White cannot afford to swing their pieces to king side because d4 pawn needs some attention. If somehow white goes c3, this opens for black an opportunity to go c5 or b4 to create clear counterplay on queen side. So what happened after b5, knight c5? Well, black easily could have taken, which would have led to a draw, but rook d5 is a better move. Black is ambitious now, and for a reason. And now a5. So white, indication of knight c5 and knight e4, it's a good indication that white is out of plan. They don't know what to do. And after a5, g3. Meanwhile, black is keep pushing pawns on the queen side. h4, g3, b4, h4, a4. Rook 1 to d2. That's another waiting move. White has absolutely no plan. Queen a7, potentially getting more control or more attack on a weak d pawn. Queen a7, king d1. It cannot be a good sign, right? It cannot be because white likes its position. If king goes to d1, it can be for one other reason. It cannot be because king wants to come and attack black's king. It can be just to evacuate to safety. King d1, queen a6, king e1, queen c4, b3, ab, and queen a6 back. Now there is a file, there is a weak pawn on d4, and the potential of c5. Black is clearly better. So this game is already did what it's supposed to do. It showed that aimless play for white. None of black's moves, it was very reasonable grandmaster playing with black. They were such a powerful. Black played every move that black played was making common sense. And now black has clear advantage. We don't need to see the whole game. So black eventually went on to win the game. This next game is a very instructive game. Actually, one of the most instructive games played with queen takes d5, d5, ed, queen takes d5, knight c3, queen a5, d4, knight f6, knight f3, c6. Now I have to point to you that c6 here has to be played. The reason why c6 has to be played, because if black goes e6, then they block their bishop, which has to be developed to f5. But if bishop goes to f5 right away, then after knight e5, white has serious threat of knight c4 potentially. And if black goes c6 now, then remember this position, then what is happening? We have the position. Well, if you remember this position, I'm going to show you that after c6, knight f3, knight f6, knight e5, and if you had played bishop f5, which is not such a good move, and we know the best move is bishop e6. That's why with the move order here, after d4, knight f6, knight f3, most accurate move order is c6. And c6 was played, knight e5, but nevertheless, black did play bishop f5. Now, bishop f5 was played and bishop c4 by white. This is not a good move, because you don't put bishop on c4 when black can go e6. Because you see, the bishop is kind of against the wall. Bishop is not going to be successful on this diagonal. So if they want to put bishop on c4, they'd much rather play bishop d3 and exchange this light square bishop, which is not also the best idea. The best move in this position is g4, which practically forces black to play bishop e6, since bishop g6 is a bad idea, as I already mentioned. And on bishop e4, now, for example, white can play rook h3. It's a very shaky position of bishop on e4. There were games and nothing good came out of this position for black. So bishop f5 should have been met by g4. So bishop c4 was played, which is a weak move. And after bishop c4, e6, now queen e2 was played. This opening, if white wants to get anything at all, they have to play very accurately. Well, on the other hand, if black wants to stay alive, they have to play accurately too. Black made bishop f5, which is not the best move and not terrible, but white's mistake bishop c4 is a lot more critical. So right now, after e6, queen e2, knight bd7 was played, bishop d2, bishop b4, knight takes d7, knight takes d7. Now, how did white get bad position because they played inaccurately? No, they just got absolutely no advantage. And in this position, it's total 0. That's what white have as far as the advantage goes. A3, knight f6. Well, bishop is immune because rook is hanging. On a1, castling. Bishop takes c3, bishop takes c3, and queen c7. Well, this position is absolutely equal. Actually, well, equal from the standpoint of evaluating, but from a playing standpoint, it's a lot easier to play for black. White has two bishops, but too many pawns. It's very hard to employ the bishops to put them to very productive work. And I have played this position plenty of times for both sides, and I'd rather not play it again for white. So after queen c7, position, as I already mentioned, equal. After rook fd1, black castled long. That was not necessary at all. Castling short was good enough, then knight d5 and b5. That would have been totally equal, but black is trying to get very balanced position and very whereas a counterplay on both sides, because they wanted obviously to win the game. That's what 200 rating points make you do. That in advantage. Okay, after castling long, bishop to e1. Bishop e1 was played by white with the idea of probably f3 and bishop g3, and it also, they want to get out of c-file to try somehow c4, and there is no other good square for a bishop, so bishop e1 was played. h5, bishop d3, knight g4, g3, knight h6, c3, g5. Now we can tell that black has a little advantage. Bishop e4, bishop takes, and queen a5, intending to play queen f5. And if queens are exchanged, black will have chance to put pressure on white's light squares. So after queen a5, bishop d2 was played, rook d to g8. Now they also have potential of attacking on a king side. Queen f5, queen takes f5, knight takes f5, bishop c3, intending d5, rook h6, rook ac1, rook d8. Still very tiny advantage for black. h3, g4. Knight on f5 is clearly better than bishop on d4. Now the rest of the game again is very insignificant for a review of our review for the opening. Black has very good position and another very, very successful opening outcome. So this was well played by black right after the opening, and white missed the correct continuation g4 in the early stage, and they never had any clear plan on any good prospects in the position. Here is the game, which is very, very typical for non-very competitive but general approach way to play this opening for white. This game was played between two masters, and basically on this variation, on Queen takes d5 variation of Center Counter, there are thousands of games, and obviously we have difficulties to pick the right one because we have so many choices. But I picked this one because from when I observed the game played on between a low to medium strong level, these positions occur all the time, this type of position. That's what made me pick this particular game, played just last year. After Queen takes d5, Knight c3, Queen a5, d4, Knight f6, Knight f3, c6. Now, in my opinion, Knight e5 is the only competitive way to play for white if they really want to get, some kind of advantage in the opening. However, the general rule said don't play with the same piece twice in the opening, but black already did, Queen d5. Knight e5 is okay move because it prevents early development of black's light square bishop comfortably. And bishop c4 is played a lot more frequently, and it's not a very good move. Of course, white is still okay because it's not a bad move. It's not the best move, I would say. Well, let's look at the game that was played with the bishop c4 move. Now, black has two choices. They can go bishop f5, which is their planned move, and they can play bishop g4, which is also okay move. After bishop g4, I have to point you that bishop takes f7 is not a good idea because king is going to take. And after knight e5 check, black plays queen takes e5, and black has two extra pieces, and white can only capture one, which means black is winning. So, in this game, on bishop c4, bishop f5 was played. Now, bishop d2, e6, and it's known theoretical move, queen d8, knight takes f6, and g takes f. Well, this is an orthodox pawn structure, but sometimes black plays variation of Karl Kahn, where they play on a fourth move knight f6 and deliberately take with a g-pawn. So this position is not necessarily bad for black. Actually, in my opinion, white has nothing here. I have played this position for both sides, and I am convinced that white has nothing, no advantage in this position. c3, knight d7, queen e2, queen c7. This is typical play. Every move made by white is the move that you should expect happening in your game. That's why I picked this very game, because this is something you can have tomorrow. So after knight d7, queen e2, queen c7, now knight h4, bishop g6, castle both sides, g3, bishop d6. What black wants to do, it's interesting that white here took on g6 and black took with h-pawn, which gives them very, very good pawn structure. But if white didn't do, so what would have black done if white went f4. And I have played it so many times, and so many times I have proved, and to my satisfaction, that my bishop on g6 is a good bishop. Oh, well, some people may say, how can you play with bishop on g6? It's like a tall pawn. It's nonsense. Bishop on g6 is a very good bishop. And, well, unless white takes it, which gives you a very good pawn structure. The reason why the bishop is good, because eventually you're going to go knight f6 and put the knight on e4, and bishop on g6 is supported, or after knight f6 you may go bishop h5. So bishop on g6 is not as bad as some people may think. So if you cannot play against the bishop on g6, then you have nothing for white. And in this game, exactly that's what happened. White had nothing. Knight takes g6, hg, h4, knight b6, bishop b3, c5, d takes c, bishop takes c5. And after bishop f4, queen c6, king b1, knight d5, bishop c1, f5. Black has very comfortable position. It's very difficult for white to move any pawns. Any pawn move will create possibly critical weaknesses. And after f5, bishop g5, rook d7, rook he1, knight b6 was played. Well, does black have an advantage? No, black has easier to play position. It's easier to play for black. Black does not have an advantage. And again, very, very successful opening outcome. So white never got any advantage. And I would blame this on move bishop c4. The very competitive move, knight e5. Now, if on knight e5, in knight e5 variation, you find comfortable play, some positions that you would like to play for black, then there is a good opening for you. Myself, when I play, I don't play center counter now in every game, but when I play, I try to stick to knight f6 move on a third move. Actually, second move, knight f6. Well, and that's good enough. And I don't say queen takes d5 is a worst move. So find good continuation on knight e5, and you have yourself a very playable opening. Now, in the middle of the DVD, I said that I will come back to knight f6 move. But why am I coming back on the end of the DVD? The reason why I am coming back, because after d4, you should play knight takes d5. And I know in last year or two, a lot of people started playing bishop g4, thinking that this is a new way to play the opening, and this is new way to play center counter, and this gives them a very good position. This is false assumption, and I tried it for both sides, and I analyzed it, and I found very devastating continuation for white. And I also, about a year ago, I put it on my DVD, how white should play. And that's why it came, I was very surprised that when I got the latest database, I saw the game, black played this variation and white played exactly the way I was suggesting on my DVD. And bishop e2 is the move, bishop takes e2. The idea of this variation to exchange early light square bishops, and after castle and e6, c4, queen h5. Actually, c4 is a bad move because of knight takes d4. Or bishop e3, and after castle, c4. Now, this is the main position that was recommended for black and said, oh, black is doing really well here, but they are not. And after knight c3, this game I want to bring you, it was total disaster for black. So I want to urge you, if you're going to play center counter, stay away from this variation. After knight c3, bishop d6, c5, bishop e7, and b4. And I suggested that and before, and I said, well, white has very strong attack, and I proved with some variations I analyzed. So what happens here? After b4, black has a choice to take this pawn, which will lead to a relatively disastrous position. So the move that was played here was in this game after b4, knight d5. It's interesting, just a few months later, after my suggestion, white played just like that. Knight takes d5, rook takes d5, b5 was played in a game, knight d8, a4, and here black sees that king's position is very dangerous, and they started evacuating the king on a king side. a5, king e8, rook fc1 may not be the best moves for white, but they are good enough to show the terrible situation they are in. b6, cb, ab, ab, cb, and black played f6, and after rook a8, the game is practically over. Black has no attack, and white is about to finish the attack. So after rook a8, there are few moves being made, a few more moves. g4 was played, knight d2, rook g8. Black has still some euphoria ideas of getting some attack there. Rook g8, rook c7, rook a5, rook b8, king f7, queen d3, queen f5, queen takes f5. Well, we don't need to see that. Knight e4, knight is coming to c5. Black's position is resignable, and it was resignable. I think after the whites move b4, position is almost lost. It's on 12th move. So do not try to adapt this variation. Do not play in this position, knight f6, d4. Do not play bishop g4. But if you do yourself a favor. Now you cannot take with the knight because of queen b5 check. You must take with the queen. If you do play it, then after knight c6, bishop e3, e6, castle. Then you play bishop e7 and try to castle on king side. But then you're going to have no counterplay and you have very passive position. So why play it? So you shouldn't be playing that variation. This is my, not complete, of course, report to you on a center counter with some sample games and interesting suggestions. Games that I showed you on the beginning of this DVD, I have shown that on a Center Counter DVD, well, first 3 games, but they were the best. They illustrate to you how you get good counterplay if white is careless, and that's why I brought them again and again. So those are the very, very good games to learn from. Thank you very much. Play Center Counter, and most importantly, be careful. Thank you.